Check out this IKEA level crystal ball aesthetic. She's spooky. I am returning today with a Halloween read, which is Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Whatever. Normally, I don't like any type of horror, thriller situation. I am very afraid of everything always, and thus don't seek out new things to be afraid of. However, this is done in a particularly gendered horror way, and thus I was very interested and have things to say. The very basic outline of this here story is that Rosemary and Guy are a newly-ish wed couple in New York. He is a struggling actor, and they move into this new apartment that has a very ominous past. And they have these new neighbor, the Castavats. Is that how you say it? Probably not. I wasn't paying that much attention, to be honest. Start taking a very intense interest in the couple. Weird stuff starts happening. Something I enjoyed about this book is how clearly situated it is in its context. The author was very clear about inserting points of like pop culture references in terms of like what was happening in politics, like talking about like newspaper strikes, the Pope visiting, which, I mean, that has connotations for the story. But you know what I mean? Just like things that are happening so you really get a sense of the context that they are situated in. To continue, do my videos read to you like verbal essays? Because sometimes that's how I feel. Anyway, continuing on. I would argue that this book is actually a very clear illustration of rape culture and abuse of women, violence against women in various forms. Let me explain. Where the story starts getting real weird is where there is an instance of spousal rape. And this is where Rosemary falls into this weird, terrible trance dream that she's having, where she's basically in a cult situation and she is being impregnated by someone that isn't her husband, because her and her husband had started talking all of a sudden about wanting to have a baby because he didn't want to and she really did, and she was like, all right, cool, we're ready now. And then this happened and she wakes up and she's like, oh my god, I had this terrible dream, what's going on? And then she's like, Guy, what the fuck happened? Because she's covered in all these scratches and whatever, and he just admits flat out to spousal rape, and she is obviously traumatized by this and is like, can't comprehend how he could have done this to her, how he could have taken her in that way. He like makes a joke about it being necrophilic, like it's so fucked up. And then throughout the narrative we see very, very clear instances of gaslighting, not only from her husband Guy, but from the what we come to know as the coven at large, who become very overly involved in their life, how she is made to become increasingly isolated, the way that she's so easily discredited by powerful men, namely a doctor, also interesting, as well as her husband. Easy to discredit her, not just as a woman, a hysterical woman, but a pregnant hysterical woman. Later on in the book, whence the baby is born, and she confirms everything that she thought and knew that was going on. Like the baby, spoilers, it's the baby of Satan. That's how it's told to her as what it is. And then there's two things that happen there. There's the narrative that she is so lucky that this powerful being, you know what I mean, Satan, chose her, and she was so special to have been chosen to be impregnated by Satan. And then there's also the thought that Rosemary is having of like, this baby is born out of an evil act, like, how do I respond to this? Does this mean that the baby's evil? Those are quite what I would say are like prevalent narratives around rape culture, specifically when there's results in pregnancy. And that might not be a fair equivalent to draw. It's obviously much more complex than that, but those are the things that stood out to me in the story as I was reading it. Something else that I found really interesting in this book goes back to the idea of the very specific pieces of context that the author gives you throughout the story. And one of the things that I was paying really close attention to, just because I find it really interesting, is the way, like, the reproductive knowledge of the time. Research that I've been exposed to or looked at in terms of looking at how people like negotiated reproductive health and discussing sexuality is like starting with Emma Goldman, like early to mid 1900s, in terms of the fact that birth control and like knowledge of cycles was a very upper middle class thing, and that it was called like any kind of contraceptive method was called, like, I think it was the rich woman's secret or the wealthy woman's secret, because there was all of these wealthy upper class women who were having 1 to 2 children, and no knowledge was being disseminated down to anyone of any other class. And so like lots of radical, anarchist, etc. people were imprisoned for the dissemination of like pamphlets and knowledge about contraception, basically, right? It was illegal, blah blah blah. So like starting there, and then we get to like 1960s, like mid 1960s New York, and they're both like marking on the calendar what her cycles are and talking about like taking the pill, and like it's just very interesting to listen to the discussions that they were having about like birth control, reproductive knowledge, that kind of thing. So happy Halloween. Beware of, you know, the dangers of heteronormativity. I look like a fucking pumpkin raccoon. Jesus.